Okay, we're just connecting now. I'll just give 30 seconds or so for people to connect. Welcome to those just joining. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming on the third and last day of the event. So just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. I'm sure you're very used to this by now, but we do encourage please to use the chat and the Q&A function throughout. We want to make things as interactive as possible. So this will be session 9, which is going to be preparing our Vaka for the future of climate mobility or immobility. So Alex, I'll hand straight over to you. The floor is yours, and enjoy everybody.
Thank you, Luke. Hello, everyone. I will be moderating the online discussions today, but most of the action and the discussions will be happening in the Suva Hub. So I will hand over to my colleagues there and look forward to supporting this discussion online. So over to my colleagues in Suva. Thank you.
Are you guys okay on that side? Maybe you need to unmute. I don't know. Are you running through Tia's account?
Sorry.
If's roommate.
Okay. Sorry, I'll just start again. Thank you, Alex, and Nimbula Vinaka, and welcome to session 9 to everyone here in the room in Suva, as well as all the participants online today, where we are preparing our Vaka for the future of climate mobility or immobility. As an emerging area of interest, climate immobility can be involuntary when people who aspire to leave lack the capacity to do so, or it can be voluntary when people choose to remain despite the risks. Involuntary immobile individuals and communities can also be known as trapped populations and are often amongst the most vulnerable because they are unable to escape the impacts of climate disasters and often do not have at their reach the resources to build a resilience as they face numerous social impacts that are further exacerbated by the pending climate crisis. Within this session, we will be looking at the significant impact of human mobility in the Pacific region and what is happening at the regional and national levels to address this. In particular, the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent at the outset identifies the need for our leadership to, open quote, ensure the protection and practice of the rights, cultural values and heritage, and traditional knowledge of Pacific peoples in global and regional protocols for climate and disaster risk reduction and mobility, including relocation, migration, and displacement, close quote. With that context, efforts have been made to support the development of a regional framework to guide all stakeholders that movement and mobility in the context of climate change, including staying in place and planned relocation and displacement, is at the heart of it, rights-based and people-centered. And in note of those efforts in drafting of the framework, this session will begin with experts who are from the actual heart of the communities that are at the front line and are of the most resilient people our region has seen, who will be speaking from lived experiences of climate change impacts, mobility, and immobility. Bula Vinaka again on behalf of the International Organization of Migration, along with partners of the Pacific Climate Change Mobility and Human Security Program and Conciliation Resources. My name is Litia Dakombaune Latikau. I am a program officer with Conciliation Resources, and we work here in partnership in Fiji with the Pacific Center for Peacebuilding and Transcend Oceania. And it is indeed my honor to be moderating today's session. And I will now introduce you to our esteemed panel who will be speaking today. First up, we have in the middle, Mr. Ben Saladakau. Mr. Saladakau was Fiji's first ambassador to South Africa and has had a long career as a civil servant, diplomat, and teacher, and is currently the Chief Operating Officer with the Archdiocese of Suva. Mr. Saladakau hails from Bunisavisavi, a coastal village on Fiji's second biggest island, Vanua level, that has been greatly impacted by rising sea levels and soil erosion. Bunisavisavi is also unique as it is home to the impressive stone and historical structure of the Lalanga Vesi, the original seat of the Tuivakau. We also have Mrs. Betty Radule, who hails from the Marshall Islands and is interning as the Ecumenical Enabler for Climate Justice at the Pacific Conference of Churches, PCC. Having grown up as part of the Marshallese diaspora in Hawaii, Betty brings to the table the perspective of youth engagement, as well as the lived experience of diaspora facing issues of climate impacts and relocation and migration. She has worked with grassroots and various youth organizations within the Pacific and Asia Pacific region to give voice to climate justice. Our third panelist is Mr. Chone Mahe of Nanuku Informal Settlement in Suva. Mr. Mahe has about 2 decades of experience in traditional security, being a former member of the British Armed Forces and working high security with the private companies between Great Britain and New Zealand. Mr. Mahe hails from Laos and having grown up in Nanuku, recently returning to assist family with current issues within the settlement, he looks at options of moving as well as representing the plight of informal settlements that are living issues of mobility and immobility, as well as issues of climate change that are affecting them. Our session will begin with a short panel presentation from each of our speakers on community perspectives in light of climate mobility and immobility. It will then move to an interactive session with those online with us today to unpack those perspectives whilst discussing questions and points, such as what is the current progress in addressing climate mobility and what are the challenges? Who are the stakeholders that need to be engaged when dealing with mobility? And what are the current initiatives and best practices that can inform action and should be scaled up? We will then move back to the room to wrap up with a short Q&A on our panel and then reflect on what we have learned from the session today. So without further ado, we have Mr. Saladakau from Bunisavisavi. So Vinaka, Mr. Saladakau, our first question to you, and to ask for your presentation to address today is, could you tell us about Bunisavisavi and the issues that Bunisavisavi has addressed recently, in most recent years, with climate change impacts, and some of your views on relocation, adaptation, mobility that has been discussed with the community over the years? Vinaka.
Thank you. Bulbinaka, everyone who are here in the conference room, and also to those of you who are online. I was only contacted 3 days ago to be part of this panel, so I hope I can remain relevant. But as you will have heard in the introduction, my village is one of those that have been earmarked for relocation. And from the outset, let me say that we would subscribe to climate immobility, not climate mobility, for various reasons. I will probably come to that in the middle of my presentation. But, apart from being a diplomat, before that, I was a teacher for many years. And when you've been teaching many years, it's very often that in any forum like this, you'll meet a number of your students. This morning, I've already met 3, and there are 2 here. I hope they are not here to correct my English. But I'm happy to be here. Just a bit of history. Bunisavisavi is a traditional home of the Tuivakau. That was where the Tuivakau was first installed. The first Tuivakau was installed there. And that's another long story traditionally. But from my recollection, there are 3 Tuivakaus who were buried there. Then the Tuivakaus moved to Taviuni. And the site of the traditional home of the Tuivakau is the Lalangavesi. That's why they call the people of the Kondrave the people of Lalangavesi. That was the site of his home. The site of the traditional home, Lalangavesi, is actually sitting in my village. So when they say Lalangavesi, I keep saying, no, that's my home. Okay? So right now in the village, Lalangavesi is one of those areas that is threatened. So that is why we are talking about climate immobility. So let me just go before I get lost. Okay, let me just. I think those of you who have questions can refer your questions to me during the break, but I'll be happy to answer. But the village sits on a very small coastal plain with a hill right behind it. And in that kind of location, of course, climate change will affect it because of the rising sea level. But we have our opinion about why the village is becoming undated. We have our own opinion about it. And I will talk about that as well. In front of the village is a tidal flat, and it has extended out. The sand there is grayish black, not white. Why? Because to me, one of the reasons why the sand is grayish black is because there is more sand coming down from the river than the ones coming from the sea. Because although we face the prevailing winds, and they can be rough at times, we have a fringing reef which kind of mitigates the power of the waves. And the fringing reef, you know, as it mitigates the power of the waves, much of the sand that it brings forth is dropped in the lagoon before it comes on shore. So that's what we think. That's what the people there believe, traditional knowledge. And so if you go there and expect to see white sandy beaches, no, the sand is grayish black. Okay, so okay, I tried to make sense of you know, the when I first saw the theme of today's of the workshop, you know, preparing our Vaka for climate mobility. I did not see immobility. Only before we came in, then I saw immobility, because I saw immobility, and immediately, you know, let me tell you, my village is against moving. You know? And I will elaborate on that one. My first collection of my village was in a house on the coast. We did not live there. My people did not live there. The chiefs lived there. But when the chiefs relocated, they asked my clan to come and look after the site of their traditional home. And that directive or request, whatever it was to the people then, to my forebears, whatever it was, they took it as their battle cry. To this day, they're very serious about it. They want to look after the site Lalavesi, and they will do whatever they can to make sure that it is saved. And right now, we are working on that one. Why my father built our house on the seashore? Because my first recollection of our house, there was a house on stilts. When I was a little boy, tiny little baby, my first recollection was looking through the holes in the floor at the fishes swimming underneath. Traditionally, we don't live like that. But why my father built this house like that, I will never know. I don't know. But we lived there for a few years, then we shifted to the land. And ever since then, we've been living on land. Perhaps it was out of respect for the chiefs, because the village itself had old sites for the various levels of the chieftains. The main chief in one end, then all these little ones who lived around the chiefs. There were sites there, because at one time when we were trying to build a church, and we chose a small raised piece of land, Tirakau came and asked, and told us, have you asked for the traditional owners of that site to build a church there? Then we were shocked. But that is how the village arrangement is. The chief's house and the house for all those who provide various services for the chiefs. Perhaps that was why when we were asked to move there, my father did not dare build his house in the village, lest he build it in the wrong place. And he will be cursed forever with his children. Obviously, he followed his intuition, and until he finally built. And let me tell you, my father kind of kept climbing up the ladder in that sense. One day we were actually living on the Lalangavesi itself. Our house was there because my father got very friendly with Tirakau. And one day he went to the Tirakau, and the Tirakau said, go and clean up the site and build your house there. We lived there for nearly 50 years. And only recently, in 2015, we demolished the house because we want to preserve the site of Alanawesi. So that's how important Punsesavi is to the province of the Konrove. If we abandon that village site, then the whole identity of the Konrove is going down into the sea. All right, so let me just continue. At the moment, as I said, there is no talk of relocation from our people. Sometimes the sea comes in during king tides, the sea comes in and the sea goes out. When you speak to the people in the village, that's all they know. The sea will come and the sea will go. And we stay. So they want to stay. So I like the introduction this morning that climate immobility, that we want to stay in spite of the risk. Okay? At the moment, we are wanting to stay in spite of the risk. Many experts have come with a highfalutin language and told us it is inevitable that we abandon the village sites. We do not agree. We will give it a try first, and perhaps second. The thought itself has never entered our minds to move. We want to stay. Perhaps it is too big a consideration, but we are giving it a go. We have been raising money, putting it aside. Just recently, we had a discussion about what we're going to do. Perhaps hire a digger and bulldozer and get some soil from up the mountain, and then, fill up the village and build it up. We think that the cause of the flooding in our village is not only the sea. There are two causes of the flooding in our village, not only the sea, but also above the village is the road that was built a few years ago. What they did was, because there's a kind of a shallow valley up behind the village, and there's a kind of natural channel that brings the water down into the village. What the road authority or whoever built that road did, they channeled all the water from the hill behind through a big drain that they have built that flows down to the village down below. And they just left it there. They did not direct the water to the river or to the sea. So the flooding in the village is coming from two sources. From the coast, because of the rising sea level, and also from the hill behind it, where they have built the drain and has just left it there and did not channel it all the way to the sea. To me, to our reckoning, the worst reason for the flooding is the drain. The tide is seasonal. Only during king tides we get the flood from the sea. Otherwise, the more regular one is the rains that is pouring into the village from the back. And because the water is not channeled anywhere, it kind of accumulates there and just causes is forming, causing a quagmire at the back, muddy patch at the back of the village. That is worse because it stays there for months. The sea will come and go, and because the sandy soil, the soil is sandy, in a day or two it dries up. But the drainage at the back will leave the houses at the back flooded and in mud for months on end. That's what we think. So we think that if we shore up the coastline, redirect the water to make sure we channel all the water to the river, because on the side there is a river. We channel all the water to the river. The only way we can, we stop the encroachment of seawater by shoring up the coastline, and then build the drainage from the back of the village all the way to the river. The place will dry up, and relatively, it's not a big job. I don't think so. And that is what's challenging us. We are raising money to get there. We want to get there because we want to save our village. We have looked at places where relocation has taken place, and we try to understand what are the issues they're faced. We looked at Bundong law. There were some social issues. I don't know whether the trauma of relocation has gone. I think that for us, it will be traumatic, because at the same time, the land at the back for relocation of the village is not really good, because it's very steep. And if we relocate, we will probably have to relocate on a piece of land which is further away. So we are looking at those issues, the social issues. In the, few years ago, the Americans, USA built four houses there. And they just built it on the hill. The project is complete. There are 4 families there who have relocated from the plain up to the slope behind it. But, the project wasn't really well discussed with the villagers. There was some, they ignored, local knowledge. People know where the water is coming from and where it goes to. And they just gave the houses. I wasn't there at the time. I was in South Africa. When I came, I saw the houses. Well, it has changed the village somewhat, because when they moved the people there, it kind of disturbed the social structure that exists within the village. In the village, those of you who know, there is a place for the families. The families live in kind of clusters. One cluster here, one cluster there, one cluster there. And all those clusters have their own functions. Functions of the relationship, the functions of support, functions of bringing up children, etc. Those are some of the subtle things that exist that an outsider would not see. So I don't know how it is going, because I told you in the beginning that Winston Sabi had the chief's house, and there was a cluster there for the various sub-clans, and they knew their role and how they supported the chief. So those are the kinds of issues that worry us. And of course, we are very tied up to our land. That's where we had our umbilical cord buried, and the bones and the remains of our ancestors are, which remain to fertilize the land in terms of, fertilize the land, fertilize the relationship, the social relationship. We keep referring to them. They are gone, but they're never really gone. That's our closeness and our ties with the place. So those are the reasons why, for us, when I saw this climate mobility, I was, it did not ring well with me. Only today, then I was told, no, it's also talking about climate immobility. Okay, that resonates well with me. I like that. We would like to stay. And to me, that is resilience. And I think we are being resilient. We will stay. We will fight this. If we get assistance, good. If not, we will see. We will give it a try. If it doesn't work, we'll try again and see. And I'm happy that the younger people are taking up the, fight. Yeah, it's become their battle cry as well. And we would like to stay. That's where we are. Thank you.
Nakabakalavu, Mr. Salavakau. Some great lessons there about learning and consulting from communities, prioritizing traditional and local knowledge, especially when in talks of migration and planning relocation, and letting those who will live the experience lead it. Next, we have Mrs. Betty Radule from the Pacific Council of Churches. Betty, thank you for joining us today. Being a youth representative as well as a part of a diaspora that migrated to another context, can you share with us what you would see are the best lessons learned for stakeholders to learn from youth and diaspora populations in terms of migration and mobility? And additionally, being with PCC, if you could expand on the role churches have played in supporting this. Vinaka.
Thank you, Litia. Yahweh, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I bring you greetings from the PCC Secretariat and would like to thank and acknowledge the organizers of this panel and everyone here today and online. So the concept of mobility and immobility is one that I feel is still extremely misunderstood in the climate justice space. There are still people out there who believe relocation is just about moving houses. And as Mr. Saladakau's testimony has shown, that is not the case. Having mobility or a lack thereof affects our freedom. It affects our sense of belonging, and that is our resilience. Today, I share my thoughts on preparing for the future from different perspectives as a youth, diaspora, and also a daughter of the North Pacific. And please forgive me if I can't go into depth with each of my perspectives with the time that we have. When we consider the daily struggles faced by young people, unemployment, drugs, and violence among them, building climate resilience is an opportunity to build youth empowerment, thereby killing two birds with one stone. You can do this by giving youth the proper tools to make informed decisions, considering principles of true inclusion, making sure young people have a space to share their own thoughts and discussions. Give them time, give them space. Do not rush them, do not belittle them, do not turn their voices into a performative action. Really listen. I'm sure there are many youth across the audience and throughout the discussions that we have had during the past few days. And so I will leave it at that. But another stakeholder in this discussion is one that I feel have not been considered very much in the context of climate change, and that is the diaspora communities. I migrated from the Marshall Islands to Hawaii when I was little because my parents were seeking better health for my mom and also better economic and educational opportunities for our families. Many Pacific communities migrate voluntarily in the same way or for other reasons. But those of us who leave our homes still keep the sacred connection to our ancestral lands and wish for the choice to return home if we so desire. Migration and mobility should be a choice. We can learn a lot about relocation from the migration of diaspora communities. This is for cases that are extreme and will require relocation as a last resort. Diaspora communities who go to new societies have to integrate themselves and face many social and financial challenges. I have found as a young person growing up away from home that people misunderstood who we are, our culture. I faced microaggressions, racism, difficulty to navigate the school environment, insurance, so many things that are that make our experience integrating into a new society difficult. So one lesson that I've found is that um, diaspora communities need support from their governments. And we have had great support from our government, but there needs to be more and more people-led development, just like Mr. Saladakau has illustrated. Another lesson that I found that churches have been a really great way for my community to have connection, culture, and build up our sense of community with one another. It is through churches that we are able to practice our traditional cultures, to meet together, to sing in our language, to meet new people from our culture, but also from outside, and also to have a meeting space that is dedicated to us. In the Marshall Islands, it is difficult to determine who is migrating because of climate change, because we have the COFA agreement, which allows us to move freely to the US. This open pathway creates unique challenges for countries like mine. How do we preserve our culture in a new space? What will happen to our prospects of returning home if we lose our islands to climate change? Many Marshallese people are already familiar with the hurt and pain of displacement due to the US nuclear testing programs. On top of that, we now have climate change exacerbating the ongoing struggles of nuclear test victims. For example, a community that has been displaced from Bikini Atoll to relocate to Kele Island. This is relocating from an atoll with a lagoon to an island that doesn't have a lagoon. So this community now, on top of cancers, has to, they don't have a place to fish. So their food security is impacted. And of course, they long to return home to Bikini, even though their island is uninhabitable. Till this day, people who are descendants of Bikini Island will say, I'm from Bikini, regardless of if they've ever stepped foot on that island before, if they're third or fourth generation. Well, the island of Kile is now facing extreme king tides, which engross almost all of the island. As a young woman from Bikini once said, my people had to relocate for the good of mankind. Now we are relocating because of mankind. Experiences of nuclear affected communities teach us that we must learn from our past. While we are fighting climate change, we should be mindful of policies and development which threaten our environment even further, including nuclear power, militarism, deep sea mining, and more. We at the Pacific Conference of Churches resolve to continue to bring church leaders together with multiple stakeholders to weave a mat of understanding and collaboration between all who are impacted by climate change and immobility. We urge governments to truly listen to all stakeholders, including youth, those who migrate as part of unique migration pathways like the COFA or POM scheme, and include faith-based organizations into the discussions. This has been a very broad topic, so please forgive me if I have not dived too deeply in any of the topics that I mentioned today, but I thank you for listening and look forward to the discussion. Komodada.
Thank you very much, Betty. Thank you for the view on the youth and the social impacts that affect them, especially when dealing with climate issues. Also, the views of the diaspora communities who have some of the most incredible stories and lessons learned from migration within the Pacific region, and the important roles of churches and the knowledge they hold for communities and being able to initiate CSOs and facilitate talks around migration. And lastly, not forgetting the invaluable view from the Northern Pacific. Thank you. Our third panelist is Mr. Chane Maher. I'm sorry, before we go to Mr. Maher, there are a few questions coming from the online chat. We will be addressing these later on in this session, so please do keep them coming through, but know that we will address them later on. Mr. Chane Maher, being from an informal settlement within the Suva area, what are issues you have seen that have caused people to move? How can they be better supported? And what are the climate impacts that are currently influencing movements from outer islands to informal settlements on mainland and that are affecting in particular Nanuku settlement where you currently reside? Thank you.
Naka, Lo, Bula, for everyone and all the organizations in the room and those are online. Nanuku settlement, there are nearly 500 households are in Nanuku settlement at the moment. And most of those, the first people who came to Nanuku was last 35 years ago. So basically, most of those Nanuku people, they've been there over 30 years. The land, the piece of land of Nanuku was given by Rotumara late on the 30 years ago. And most of the people that came to Nanuku, they came from the outer islands. And to answer your question, what is the reason that people from outer islands coming into Nanuku? Before I go further, the last time we checked on the households living in Nanuku for the last 2 years, it was 300 households altogether. But then we checked again late this year, it was nearly 500 households altogether. Last 2 months ago, we one of the NGO, we had this risk assessment, disaster risk assessment. It lasts for 1 week. It helps us a lot on how to prevent all this climate change and what we're facing in Nanuku. The best we can do in Nanuku at the moment, because we didn't get much help from the government, and the best we can do is to bury all those mangroves and digging drainage to avoid flood. And the flood, it only happens on every end of the month when it's new moon. And we all know when it's new moon, it's a high tide. And during raining season, for all the soil we try to bury, and all those rain wash it away back to the sea. For the vulnerable ones, young ones and old ones, because of the houses are too further down to the mangroves, it's hard for us hard for them to bring the especially ambulance or fire trucks if any fire occurs in the settlement. The difficulties we are facing at the moment is drainage, and plus building up footpaths, proper footpaths for the vulnerable ones. Most of these families, they came from Koro straight after the Hurricane Winston. Because of that windows that the government gave Koro to assist Koro, they've been waiting there for a while, and because of their children are in school, and the only option for them to bring their kids to Suva, and plus on the life in Suva, rent and food are too expensive. The only place they come to is to Nanuku, because they don't pay any rents. And for us, all crowd up in Nanuku, the houses are all end up to the mangroves at the moment. Some Kiribati families, they moved to Nanuku as well because of the climate change they face in Kiribati. And some of the families, they move into Nanuku because of the academically to support their children in Suva. How can we support how can we support Nanuku to avoid those floods? We try our best to dig drains and bury and make footpaths, proper footpaths for the vulnerable one, for those who are going to for those young ones to go to school. And when it's raining, some of those footpaths are flooded, and most of the kids, they didn't end up to school and end up staying in their houses. For all these different families and where they come from, we all crowded up to Nanuku, and they bring different attitudes and different because where they come from. What we are trying to do as a committee in Nanuku, we try to organize workshops for police to come in to give advice, and some other organization to come and do workshops in our settlement, just to help out for our kids. And most of the kids end up dropping from school just because of this influence going around in the settlement. What are the climate impacts that we currently influence movement from outer islands? Like I said, they only move to Nanuku because of the support, the academic, and plus the climate change. When the hurricane hits their island and they don't have anywhere to go, they end up to Nanuku. As what are the climate impacts? Yeah, in Nanuku, the only department we are contacted with through the government is through police. We try our best to arrange some other contacts, like to the council, to assist us on some other things to can help us through this what we're facing at the moment. I think that's it.
Sorry, just to add as well for Mr. Maher, those of you in the room might be seeing on the screen behind us and to my right images from Nanuku and currently where the residents are and how they're being affected, and going to his point of difficulty to access Nanuku for the residents as well as for emergency services.
Because of those, because of the high tide, it does a lot of damage into the settlements. Most of the houses collapse because weaken their house post, and the footpath that goes into other households that are close to the mangroves. Like you see in the pictures, we try our best to dig drainage, big drainage, and when it's rain, it all washes down all the soil we buried and back into the drain. We didn't get any notice to move yet. We didn't get any money for relocation. The reason why these people are so living comfortably in Nanuku, because Nanuku is so close to every facilities here in the city. For them to move or move to another area away from the city, because their jobs are only suit them for what the life in Suva, because the rents are too high, and the only job they can get is the easy job, the like labor job. Most of them, they come from the island, they are not well educated. They go straight to the labor job, and then try just to, so most of them, they try to support their kids are in school, secondary level, and most of them are in tertiary level. I think that's about it. Thank you.
Pinaka, Mr. Maher, one thing that really stood out in the front in the beginning was the rapid rise in population of informal settlements in the last 2 years, especially issues of outer islands facing that are not being addressed, which are somewhat forcing relocation inland, and climate impacts that are currently affecting the settlement where it is making access and mobility difficult, as well as the disconnect of informal settlement residents with governance and needed resources, but still wanting to be near where everything is centralized to in the capital because it's not accessible to them in the outer islands that they're moving from. Thank you very much, Mr. Maher. And can we have another round of applause for our panelists today? Thank you. Before we start addressing questions for the panelists from those online and in the room, we are going to an interactive discussion session that will be discussing some of the topics that were brought up within the panel, which will be conducted by Alex online. Thank you. And Sabira here in the room. So I will now hand over to Alex. Thank you, Alex.
Vinaka, Litia. Thanks everyone. Thanks to the panelists for sharing these very personal stories, and I think it puts a real kind of face to a lot of this with the climate mobility work and with the policy making. At the end of the day, it really comes down to the people's experiences that really need to inform how policies are made and implemented. So we're really grateful for your inputs today. So if you could, this is an interactive activity for everyone online and everyone in the room. You can connect to this through the Mentimeter. And if you go to menti.com on your phones or on your computers, if you're able to do this, the code to type in is 3401-4813. It's on the screen there, 3401-4813 at menti.com. And you should be able to log into this session online and interact with it. So we've asked a few questions there. The first one is, how much do you agree with the following statements? Climate mobility, which is migration, displacement, and planned relocation, is a significant issue in the Pacific. Second, displacement from disasters is a form of loss and damage. And third, we need to take action to address climate immobility or mobility. So whether people are moving or if they decide that they want to stay. So thanks for everyone who's already logging in. Hopefully you haven't had any issues with it, but we can see now that there's a lot of support with this. So people are agreeing across the board. And I think the strongest one is that action is needed to address climate immobility. So we'll give it a couple more seconds and we can move on to the next one. I also just want to note that we've had some great questions in the chat online. So we'll make sure that we dedicate a few minutes to ask them of the panelists. And we also had some people with their hands up online. So if you could please put your questions in the chat, then we can make sure we tie everything together. So maybe Sabira, we can move to the next one. Thanks. So based on the presentations and your own experience, what is one concrete action that can be taken to address the challenges of the impacts of climate change and the issues of moving or staying, climate immobility? So you can actually type in a short sort of comment, and this will be coming up on the screen. So just think of one maybe concrete action that can be taken, something maybe you've been doing already, or something that you feel is a gap that's missing an action by government or by other stakeholders, civil society organizations or communities. So we thank you. We already have some comments coming in. Listening to the needs of local communities. More awareness, everyone should be involved. So that's a really good point on inclusion, making sure that everyone in the community is consulted, everyone's needs are taken into account. Coordination meetings of civil society, private sector, FBOs and government. So yeah, to make sure that things are not being doubled up, or that the opportunities for collaboration are there, and we can work together and make sure the resources and the time are used effectively. So this is great. There's a lot coming in. Listening to what local people are saying. More thorough strategic urban planning that prioritizes the effects of climate change and utilizes local knowledge, respecting culture, and look at a really key one, of course, cutting carbon emissions drastically. So we're here dealing with the sort of the impacts, but really the source of this is to do with climate change and carbon emissions, and so that's a really important point to be making. Great. Look, there's a lot there, so maybe we'll thank you for that. We'll keep that on record, and then the next question is, what is the most urgent requirement to support the implementation of these actions? So what you've been sharing, what do you feel is sort of a barrier to that? What's missing that maybe could help do those things that you've identified? So yes, this is if you're putting in words, it's a word cloud. So if the more people that put in the same words, the bigger the words will be on the screen to show the sort of the popularity. So funding is urgently needed, awareness is needed, data. So you can just put in a word or two of what you feel are the most urgent requirements. We can see consultation coming up with the communities. So consultation is there. It's quite a significant one, addressing local needs, traditional knowledge, taking that into account. stakeholder mapping, so understanding who is involved in all this and who might be sort of being left out. Coordination. So I think funding, because it's bigger, it's clearly coming up for more people, for more participants. Funding, consultation, and awareness. These requirements seem to be the most popular and the key ones. So thanks. There's also a lot of diversity there. We'll harvest that for sure. Okay, we can move to the next question. Thanks. So who are the key stakeholders that need to be engaged in dealing with climate mobility or immobility? So just think of, you can put key stakeholders that you have been engaging with, or again, really importantly, if you feel someone who has been left out should be included. We have communities, of course, that are being impacted, NGOs, donors, the young people, that's great to see there, residents, people who are being affected, government, of course, women and youth. I think that's really good to highlight that. The issue of inclusion, local government, so working at all different levels. And local government often has a really good understanding of the local issues because they work closely with the communities. Humanitarian actors. So, and vulnerable groups, yes. I think it's really important to look at that climate change is not affecting everyone equally. So who might be more vulnerable to its impacts? Okay, we're running out of time, so let's move on. Thank you. Can you share an example of progress in addressing climate immobility in the Pacific? So any kind of success stories or anything you feel has worked really well to share with everyone. This can be sort of a short sort of phrase, description, progress in addressing climate immobility. I mean, one thing just to highlight, the regional framework on climate immobility that IOM and PIFs have been working on is progressing, as I understand it. So that would be an example from me. And, you know, through very thorough consultations. Yeah. So look, I think we probably will need to wrap up. Thank you everyone for this interactive participation. And we just have some time now. So, okay, we've got some good examples of progress, by the way, I'll just mention. But we'll wrap up and we'll move to some of the questions just to make sure that we have time for that. But just quickly, some of the progress, the standard operating procedures in Fiji for planned relocation. So that's been going on with the guidelines, National Adaptation Plan in Fiji. So a lot of examples in Fiji, but I'm sure across the Pacific there are also efforts at the moment, and it would be good for us to kind of share these things, and so there's more awareness of what's going on, because we can really this can help. We can be inspired by what's happening in other countries in the region. So thank you everyone, and thanks Sabira for that online interactive activity. So just looking at some of the questions, firstly, there's a few about Vunisavisavi, a few about Nanuku. I just wanted to go to Ms. Betty. There was a question from the PNG hub. So basically asking about youth involvement, and I'll read it out. It's how do youths and young people respond to climate mobility and immobility in your country? So kind of giving examples of youth action, things that can inspire other youth in the region. Yep. Sorry, we're not getting any sound online. I'm just checking.
All good. Can you hear me
Yes,
now?
okay. Yes, great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that question. One example I could think of off the top of my head is the National Adaptation Plan, which is government-led, and there's actually a really wonderful youth organization called Jotjagum who has been carrying out rich and detailed consultations with communities, and this is all 24 districts coming up with a really, really detailed plan of what communities want. And so that when people come to support our adaptation, we already know what we want. It's already all in there. Consultations with women, with young people, with all the different districts that are represented in the Marshall Islands and their unique needs. And I believe that youth have been a really great um, driving force in this initiative, because we are able to learn great practices and bring them back home, apply them in ways that are innovative and thoughtful, and consider, what is happening in the modern world with our traditional heritage. So that's one I can think of. Jojigam is doing a lot of other really great projects, and I would recommend for any youth that would like to learn more to look into them. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Okay, look, we have a lot of questions. We have not very little time, unfortunately. We want to make sure that all the questions that have been asked, that we can share them with the panelists, and that we can then share the responses. So we definitely don't want to lose anything. But maybe I can just quickly go to Mr. Salathakau. There was a couple of questions about when you say Sabi. One was asking whether you've considered the effect of deforestation, whether that's contributing to the flooding. And then the second question also about the links in the community. So if people are leaving, how does the community then kind of reweave the links and make sure that that cohesion stays there? Yes, thanks.
Just the one question. The first one, it's about deforestation. No, deforestation is not the cause for the flooding at the back of the village, because the hill at the back is grassed. It's covered in reeds and a bit of forest. It's not bare. There has not been any deforestation there. It was always been reeds from the beginning. So, no. The flooding there is basically from the road. We have had issues with, we had the Minister for the Environment come and see. We asked them to redirect the drain because it comes up on the hill and it goes down on the other side as well. Directly underneath the hill is the village. We asked them to redirect the drain downwards to the valley so that it goes down to the creek on the other side, so that it doesn't flow down to the river. But when it comes to so it doesn't flow down to the village. But basically the road is the reason. So if we can manage that, so that the water is, doesn't come down, the 100% of the volume is not flooding into the village, but going from the road downwards, and then once it comes to the village, we can redirect to the river. It will dry up the back of the village. So not deforestation.
Okay, Vinaka. Look, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Jonna, there was also some questions for you. So what we might do is just collate them and then continue this offline and share the feedback for the participants. But I will hand over back to Latia, maybe just to say some final remarks. And thank you all for your participation.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you. It's unfortunate that all the questions haven't been answered, but please send them through and we will ensure that they are answered and put up online. Just to wrap up the session before everyone breaks for lunch, a big thank you to the panelists for taking the time out to be here today, share the perspectives from your respective communities and experiences. One thing I think we should take and reflect from a lesson learned is that was highlighted in the beginning with the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, again, was ensuring the protection and practice of the rights, cultural values, and heritage and traditional knowledge of Pacific people, and consultations with the communities that are living the experience and will have to live the experience of the decisions that are made at a regional and national level. The lessons that are learned from them are invaluable and can save a lot of resources and time in the long run for all stakeholders that will be involved. Thank you very much for the time of everyone that came online, everyone here in the room today, and most especially again to our panelists. Nakavalepo.